Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Welcome to episode number 58 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the Observer's Notebook, and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thank you for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomenon, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, otherwise known as the Strolling Astronomer. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook, the handbook of the ALPO training program. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can help us out by going to www.patreon, that's patreon.com/Observer's Notebook. If you'd like to join the ALPO, you can for as little as $18 a year. For more information, you can visit us on the internet at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And we're also on the Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy up there in the top search field. And yes, the podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode of the podcast. And now, the Observer's Notebook. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Observer's Notebook podcast. We have a special guest today, the coordinator for the Mercury section of the ALPO, Frank Melillo. Welcome to the podcast, Frank.
Hi, thank you very much. Welcome. It's nice to be here.
Before we get started, why don't you give everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
Yes, okay. I'm 60 years old, and I live on Holesville, Long Island, New York, which located in central Long Island, about 60 miles east of New York City. And my job is that I work as an accountant at the physical recycle insurers, which is the malpractice insurance company, and I'm doing the financing work at the department. And I have two telescopes, and I have a Selectron 8-inch telescope, and I have also a 10-inch meet. And basically, I'm doing a lot of planetary observing and imaging, and I've been doing that for a very long time, since I was 11 years old. And I got into astronomy and during the Apollo era days, and I got interested in astronomy. I was attracted to the beauty of the universe, and I think my parents got my first telescope when I was like 11 years old. Back, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it was in Christmas 1969. I remember it was like a little refractor telescope that you can put on the table. And I have growing interest in astronomy, and I got a little bigger telescope, which is the reflector, optic reflector, and have like a 30 magnification, 40 millimeters, something like that. And I had it for a year and a half. And when I turned 13, back in August 1971, I got a 4.5-inch reflector, Tasco, which is a very popular brand back in the 1970s. And that's during the same time during the Martian operation, the very favorable operation of Mars back in August 1971. I remember we were looking through the telescope, and I see the first time real feature on the planet Mars. And so I had that telescope throughout the 1970s. And then finally, I got the Selectron 8-inch telescope in 1980, which I still have it now. And then I have a Me 10-inch also, and it's the telescope 8-inch telescope is very, very handy. And I did a lot of planetary observing. I thought to do astrophotography and planetary imaging too. And I used to work with film.
What's film?
The 24,
oh,
15.
Never mind.
Yes. Yeah, and so, as time progresses, I got into the CCD in the late 1990s, and I've been doing that ever since. And but just my main passion is planetary observing and imaging, and which I
now, how are the skies in your area of New York?
It's fairly light polluted, but not severely. It's considered like a moderately light polluted sky, and is on a good clear night I can see the fourth magnitude stars, and very, very rarely I can see the Milky Way in the constellation Cygnus, which is right overhead. Toward the west, it's kind of a little bit washed out because it's heavily populated, close to New York City. But toward the east and the south, it's the darkest part of the sky because toward the south, you're looking at the Atlantic Ocean, and toward the east, you're looking further around on Long Island, and a little bit toward the north, but I don't do too much observing during the north. It's on good clear nights. I can, see most of the deep sky objects, and of course the planets is always the main passion there.
Yeah, your background sounds a lot like mine. I'm a couple years older than you. I'm 62. And I grew up on the left coast with the light pollution of LA, and
oh yes,
with the small refractor and the larger telescopes are getting older. So yeah, it sounds like the same astronomical events affected both of our lives. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that when I was doing it back in the 1970s and 80s, I was living at my parents' at that time, and I was living 2 blocks away from New York City and 10-15 minutes away from the Kennedy Airport, which is the most busy airport in the nation. And I've been doing a lot of deep sky observing and imaging using the film back then. And it was okay back then. It was, I'm talking about like 45 years ago. It was okay. But now today at the same place, at my mother's house, it's completely washed out. There's a lot of lights around there. So now I'm further east, which is not too bad, but still, it's not a very good place if you want to really doing like a wide angle deep sky. You need like narrow band filters for doing that.
Yeah, it's difficult to do real deep sky stuff anywhere near a city.
Yeah.
So you have a minor planet named after yourself, right?
Yeah, the asteroid named after me. Yes.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago. I was very surprised by that, and it was discovered in March 2000. It was designated as minor planet 2000 EZ70. So I know very little about this asteroid. I think it takes about 4.5 years to go around the sun, and it's usually very, very, very faint. I mean, I haven't seen it, but it's considered like 18, 19 magnitude down to 20 magnitude. So it's beyond my limit of the CCD imaging here. But however, if I understand, next year in June, there's a very possibility that I can image with the 10-inch telescope because that asteroid will be near perihelion at opposition. So it will be as bright as it can be, but the brightest will be about 17 magnitude.
Pushing the limits.
So that's within the range of the CCD imaging with the 10-inch telescope under good clear nights. So hopefully I will have an opportunity to see just a little speck of light, and that's the asteroid they name after me. But that would be a thrill. But
yeah, it would. And you also in 2004 were given the Walter Haas Award, right?
Yes.
It's the most prestigious award the ALPO has.
Yes, it was given to me in 2001. I'm the ALPO member since 1984, so you're talking about a good 34 years. And since that time, I've been contributing many planetary observation that include photometry, imaging, planetary imaging. I've been, it's pretty well recognized as a very active membership throughout the 1980s and 1990s. And that I had an opportunity to become a Mercury Coordinator in 2001. And at the same time, a Walter Haas Award was given to me. One of the most outstanding member for that period of time.
Yeah, congratulations on that. Now, how did you get involved with the ALPO?
How did you get involved?
Okay. How I get involved? Well, like I said, the planetary imaging is my main passion, and then when I got the 8-inch telescope, I got more involved doing more planetary imaging, and I thought about ALPO. So why not to become a member? Because I like to see the planetary imaging. When I do that, like to be more observation more meaningful. When I send it in, it can be analyzed, can be studied, and compared with other observation. And so that'll be quite a thrill. So I became a member in 1984, and I received the first journal, and I can see all the information. All the other members contribute to the organization. And I knew ALPO for a long time, but I don't know why it took me so long to become a member. And until I was like 22 years old when I became a member, and it's really a pleasure to be a member. So I really like that group.
Yeah, I've been a member for a long time as well. Now, we're going to talk about the Mercury section. You're the coordinator of that group. How long have you been the coordinator?
Okay, I've been a coordinator for the last 17 years, in 2001.
Okay, and give me an overview of the section. What type of observations do you have, that type of thing?
I remember, well, it wasn't a very active group, especially in the 1990s, and it wasn't a very active group. And the very few people was contribute to that session, and they have coordinators. At that time, they called a recorder, and they keep changing, one recorder to another, and it wasn't a very active group because all the other sessions, then they have a lot of involved in here. But Mercury it wasn't too active, and I was taking pictures using film at those days, and it's quite a decent shot. And when I usually turn into the coordinator, and they really like my picture, it's nothing but a little, it's like the face of the moon, and so that pretty highly at that time. And I was the most active member to contribute to the Mercury session. So when the last coordinator stepped down, Julia Benton asked me if I'm willing to become a coordinator because I was showing the most active member. And sure, and and I became the coordinator, and I'm pretty happy about that. And when I did that, then I started to contact memberships and all the members, and then I started to get a lot of observation. It's like, before it was like a dying session. I mean, it was just like it's just going to disappear. And so I brought it back to life, and now we have a lot of observers back during that time, and now they're back to action.
I hope this podcast can help generate some more interest. I know Mercury is such an elusive planet. I think the number of times I've actually observed it, I could count on both hands in my entire life. It's just something you have to look for. It's not like Venus or Jupiter or Mars that just stands out in the night sky. It's near sunset or sunrise, and it's a little bit more difficult to see.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, what type of equipment do you suggest people use for contributing to the Mercury section?
Okay. It's back in 2001, and then I started to do a lot of imaging, and I then contact a lot of observers, and they showed a very very interesting on the corner.
Type of equipment.
Okay. Yes. Okay. The equipment I use, it was you don't need a large telescope to observe Mercury. You just need like maybe a modular size, or maybe a small size, or modular size, maybe like a 10 or 12 inch, and no more. A pair of binoculars. Binoculars are good equipment to catch Mercury. You can use the binocular to catch Mercury before visible with the naked eye. You can see it light earlier and after sunset, and even later after sunrise. During the sunrise, you can catch Mercury through the binoculars. And it's also during the planetary conjunction, you can compare Mercury with other planets as far as color, the brightness, how well it can compare the color. Like if there's a planet Jupiter nearby Mercury, you can see the color difference. Like Jupiter is creamy white, and Mercury is like a rosy red. And so you can compare colors. Same thing with Venus. Venus is very bright and creamy white, and compared to Mercury, it looks like a dull, rosy color.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, so you can compare the colors like that. But generally, like a small telescope, you're able to see the Mercury face. But if you really want to catch the details, but it's going to be a little more sophisticated because you don't observe Mercury floating in the sky. So I encourage a lot of amateur astronomers to observe Mercury because they have a larger telescope. They're very well equipped. And, the one thing they're afraid of is to point Mercury too close to the sun. And they don't like to do that. Because of their portability, they can move the telescope around where it's more convenient located to observe Mercury. But I always recommend Mercury to observe during the daytime when it's much, much higher in the sky. There's always a possibility that you can capture possible details on the surface of Mercury if you plan it well enough in advance to observe Mercury during the daytime. And you have to be pretty well prepared for it. But usually, like again, my modular size telescope will do with equatorial mount. Also, you need something like some kind of filter, like a Vacuum 25 filter or long pass, like 600 nanometer long pass filter to cut down the blue light if you observe Mercury during the day, because that will give a very nice contrast. And the blue sky will appear much darker, and Mercury will appear much, much brighter and a better contrast. So yes, that's the best way too, because you want to observe Mercury in the high in the sky as possible, which means the daylight. But there's a lot more planning to do. Just trying to observe Mercury in the daylight. First of all, you have to find it, and you have to know exactly where it is on the day you're observing, related to the sun. So you have to be very careful. I do not recommend anybody, beginners, to trying to observe Mercury during the daytime because of the danger of pointing too close to the sun. But however, if you place the telescope in the shade, like if you have a building or a roof of the house blocking the sunlight, and Mercury probably will have a very short window of observing time where you can able to observe Mercury in the daytime before the sunlight will hit the telescope. Got to make sure that the telescope is in focus. The best way to focus, if the moon is out, or Venus, if they both place on the same side of the sun, you can observe Venus first, make sure that they're focused, and you set up the coordination, set up the position in declination and in right ascension. Once you get that, then you find out Mercury position, the coordination of Mercury. Once you find out, then you can able to swing over to where Mercury should be. So hopefully, it would be thing that agreed around the field, and you can easily find Mercury in the daytime.
That's a great tip, using Venus as a guide to find Mercury. Yeah. Now, when you talk about observations, are you talking about visual observations? And by visual, I mean drawings or imaging. What type of observations do you normally get for the Mercury section?
Well, when I first became a coordinator, there was a lot of people doing a lot of drawings, sketching, and they look like the face of the moon, and you can able to see some of the details, but it's very, very, very hard to make it out what they saw. And also later in the decade, around 2010, that's when a lot of people started using the webcam imaging. It's improved dramatically. The technology improved dramatically with the webcam imaging. If we could able to take many images and stack them and process it with the software, where we stack on the imaging, and believe me, Mercury is very, very very well taking the imaging, very well taking with the software, and it's quite amazing that now a lot of people doing more webcam imaging than drawing. But don't forget, drawing is very, very important because you learn what you see. And
it's very true. I run the training program, and that's what I emphasize. So thank you for plugging it.
Yes. So you learn what you see, and you remember what you see, and it's amazing. So that's what I used to draw into, and then I turned into CCD imaging, and everything is very, very, very. It's amazing, though.
Yeah, now, how many current contributors does the Mercury section have?
How many contributors?
How many contributors would be? Well, when I first became coordinator, I have a lot of observing. A lot of people observing. I would say at least 10, 11, 12. Now, as the year progressed, it's getting less and less. I tell you, during the first, between like 2001 to 2010, we have a lot of people observing Mercury because that was the upcoming of the spacecraft Messenger. Now, the one thing I like to mention about the Messenger spacecraft, what the Messenger stand for Mercury Surface, Space Environment, Geochemistry, and Ranging. It launched in 2004 and arrived at Mercury 2011. So that's a good 7 years. The reason it took so long because they have to make the spacecraft to slow down because as it headed toward the sun, it tends to speed up the spacecraft. So in order to slow it down, they had to do many flybys to the gravitation pull from the planet to slow down the spacecraft. So we have like several flybys of Venus and few flybys on Mercury before they finally enter the Mercury orbit. So that was that time. It was the highlight of doing the Mercury extension because a lot of people trying to image Mercury with some of the details which haven't been seen yet by the Messenger spacecraft. So we have a very good idea what Mercury surface look like. Just an idea what might look like, because with some of the imaging, we see some of the spots on the surface. Those are crater ejector rays. We don't see the crater itself, but we see the ejector rays, very similar to what you see on the moon. Copernicus and Tycho, when you see those rays. So that became visible in the amateur telescope. And so that's the major one of the major features that can be imaged in amateur telescope. And also some of the dark albedo features, one of the darkest area, also being imaged too. And so with the CCD, it became a very, very popular and become within the technology. It's incredible. And some of the imaging now done by amateur astronomers can be comparable with the Messenger's spacecraft imaging. It's quite amazing.
Yeah. Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to mention one person, John Bundrau. He's from Massachusetts, and he became very, very successful of the imaging Mercury. His images are outstanding, and he's probably one of the best imagers around the time now, and he's incredible. He did with 11-inch telescope. And his techniques are phenomenal. Some of the imaging that he did one morning apparition, he took several shots, 3 days apart or something like that, and he converted to a short animation. And you can see Mercury change the face, and you can actually see the rotation with all the features move with the rotation. And they move across the disk. It's incredible, and he's still taking images now. And so that during the height of the time. Then after between 2011 and 2015, that's when the Messenger spacecraft orbiting, and they have a lot of images that we compare with our work, and we can able to find out, what we saw and what we see and what we imaging and what we drew, and compare with the Messenger images. And it's consistent one another. And we really saw, we really did what we, see. And that's incredible. I mean, but now the last couple of years, it winding down a little bit. So hopefully we can able to boost it up more observers, and so hopefully, we have more people to observe Mercury.
That would be great, and hopefully this podcast can help you out. Now, you talked about the Messenger program, and is there much amateur and professional collaboration in the Mercury section?
Yeah, when I became a Mercury coordinator, I got in touch with some of the Mercury experts from the Lunar Planetary Laboratory in Arizona, and don't forget that very few professional astronomers devoted their time to observe Mercury. So it was just like very few that I contact with it, and also they're doing some kind of observation. They want amateur astronomers to help, but there's so much we can do, except for imaging, the surface. But that was back then. That was doing when we were used to doing with the films, and like photometry or something like that. But it's very, very difficult to. So we have some of the Mercury Watch program. It was somewhat successful, but it was difficult at that time. It was, yeah.
Where are your observations published?
Most of the observation published in the ALPO journal. That's where I publish all my observation. I receive observation from the observers, and I analyze them, and I write them, and I publish in the ALPO journal. And I do that every year. I just did a 2017 observation of Mercury, and then before I used to do 2016, 2015. So mainly I do this every year. Then I divide up when I do the journal. Right for the journal, I divide up for each apparition. Morning apparition number 1, then then number 2, evening apparition, then number 3, morning apparition. Usually about apparition report about 6 to 7 times each year. So I diverted to one big article to write up for each year.
Okay. Does the Mercury section have a separate newsletter or anything, or all your?
Yes, I do have newsletters. I write it, almost every quarterly. It's just like an update, what's going on, like any special contributor, that help out the session.
So how could people receive the newsletter?
Yes.
No. How can people?
Yeah, I did get them.
How can they get the newsletter?
How get the newsletter? Well, they usually publish in the journal, a news session.
Okay.
Yeah, and anything that help out the session, then I just write out, and all the update events coming up, any like a very close planetary conjunction with Mercury. When Mercury comes, like upcoming apparition, then write a little bit about it, what to observe, what you see, any close planetary conjunction, so forth. Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share about the Mercury section?
Well, I continue to be a coordinator, and I just wish many people would write the list down to observe Mercury. And we have another spacecraft coming up. Pepe Colombo is the Italian and Japanese spacecraft that they just launched on October 20th, and so that would probably be the next the next events for boosting up the Mercury session. So hopefully within the next 7 years that the spacecraft is expected to arrive there. It would be very similar to the Messenger spacecraft, but it probably would be a little bit differently as far as it would be maybe more imaging or something like that. And also they have a Japanese instrument there too. I think it's supposed to split up, and one will do something else, something like that. I remember offhand, but it's supposed to arrive there 2025, 7 years from now. So that's a long time. So it will follow the Messenger spacecraft where it left off. So hopefully I will still be the coordinator.
So it's a Mercury specific spacecraft, just Mercury only.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Mercury only. It's only Mercury.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. I'm sort of spacecraft. Yeah. Yeah, that's the only spacecraft. Yeah.
Well, how can everybody get a hold of you if they're interested in contributing to the Mercury section, Frank?
Yeah. Okay. They can contact by email. My email is frankj12@aol.com. And if they have any questions, if they have any anything, want to know how to observe Mercury, how to get involved, what to observe, what to see, what kind of filters or instruments, kind of telescope that you can observe Mercury, and so I have very very few people to contact me. And I hope that more people will. I used to have a lot of international, especially European people, European observers. They're very, very interested in observing Mercury. So hopefully it continue to contribute to the session.
Well, hopefully this podcast helps get the word out. Well, Frank, I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast today.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
It's a pleasure.
well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I again want to thank Frank Melillo for coming on and giving us a nice little talk about the Mercury section. Get out there and observe Mercury, everybody. Come on, let's help out the section. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook every few weeks. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. And you can also listen to us now on iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and Amazon Echo. You can support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon. If you feel really generous, you can give up to $35 a month, where you receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producer of this podcast, Steve Siedentop, for his generous support of the Observer's Notebook. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. If you'd like to get a hold of me with a question or a comment, you can email me at commentman@commentman.net or on Twitter at @ObserversNBPod. If you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. Find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thank you for listening.